talking about taxation. So I think on purpose, we discussed what the topic of this discussion should be. And purposely, we didn't include anything relating to taxation here because I remember I've been here for the past 4 years talking about taxation, and 4 years ago, people were looking at me like, what, crypto and taxes, what are you even talking about? So we were more thinking of something like upcoming reporting requirements. But actually, the issue of taxation and tax information reporting has become more and more substantial. So it's a pleasure to have such an outstanding panel here with Colby and Dorina. Maybe, Colby, I quickly hand over to you to quickly introduce yourself.
So is this on? Yeah, hi. Thanks, Max, and thank you, Tommaso, and thanks everyone for being here, for listening to us talk about taxes, which is, you know, my favorite topic, but maybe not everyone else's. So my name is Colby Mangels, and I'm a tax policy advisor at the OECD. In terms of my background, I've been at the OECD about 6 years now. I started there working on tax reporting requirements. But then about 5 years ago, I got pulled over to go work at the Financial Action Task Force, and I worked there for a few years working on the VASP development of those standards. And at that time, it was, you know, obviously a new area, a new field for AML to work in. And once I got the experience in that, I kind of got pulled back into the tax world at the OECD to work on the CARF. And the CARF is basically a marriage of tax reporting requirements and the VASP standards. So if we think about it like that, those are two things that we kind of understand, but this is being applied obviously in a new context of the crypto asset space. And what we're working on right now is making sure that this is a standard that we have across the entire world, and we'll get into that more in part of the panel. Thanks.
Thank you. Dorina?
Hey everyone, I'm Dorina Juhasz. I work at Bitvavo, and I'm coordinating all the regulatory implementation efforts that are coming at us as a soon-to-be MiCA-regulated CASP. Now, this is quite a complex task, and the crypto industry is going through a lot and is going to be going through a lot. I feel like next to MiCA, DORA, TFR, the tax requirements or the reporting requirements are maybe a little bit slapped on, but it's going to be very, very impactful for all crypto asset service providers. So looking forward to this discussion.
Thank you very much, Dorina. And maybe just to, this is always how I go into discussions as well, because I often see that people, when I say tax, people turn their backs and they don't really want to talk. So I always differentiate between two bubbles. And this is something I want to kind of make clear straight from the start. There is the one bubble, which is really de facto taxation. So how much tax do I need to pay in an individual country, and what is the tax regime that really applies in this individual country? This is not what we're going to talk about. What we talk about is the second bubble, and that's tax information reporting. And I always say when it comes down to tax information reporting, that is actually way more closely interlinked with AML regulation than it is with actual taxation. So when we talk about information reporting, we are really talking about the core fundamentals of compliance. And so the core legal regime we're going to talk about today is the Crypto Asset Reporting Framework of the OECD, an international standard that was added as a pendant for digital assets for the common reporting standards known from the more traditional financial sector, as well as amendments to the common reporting standards to also include e-money tokens, so basically specified electronic money tokens, what we call stable coins or CBDCs, right? So the Crypto Asset Reporting Framework, to give you a quick summary of what it actually contains, is a three-staged regulation. First of all, it requires service providers to conduct KYC on all of their new customers from 1st of January 2026, as well as pre-existing accounts, and actually get valid self-certifications from their customers about their tax residency. So what is their tax identification number or tax identification number equivalent? What if the service provider does not get this information? So in the European Union, they implemented the Crypto Asset Reporting Framework through a directive called DAC8, DAC 8, which is the 8th Amendment to the Directive on Administrative Cooperation. This foresees that if the service provider doesn't receive a valid self-certificate, so if they don't receive from a customer their tax identification number or an equivalent, they need to freeze the account from performing any exchange transaction within 90 days. So we will see that this will kick in quite soon, and this will be 1st of January 2026. Then the second thing that is introduced through the crypto asset reporting framework is transaction monitoring and transaction reporting. So basically from 1st of January 2026, every single reportable service provider in a participating jurisdiction has to start monitoring and tracking transactions of their users, and then report these transactions or the aggregate volumes that were transferred per assets, dividing between in and outgoing transactions, to the local tax administrations where they run their business. So for example, in the case of Bitpanda, that would be Austria, Vienna. In the case of Bitvavo, that would be Amsterdam. And then these local tax administrations receive all the information about the individual traders on these platforms. And what they are then going to do, and this brings me to the third part of the crypto asset reporting framework, this introduces the automatic exchange of information to digital assets. Namely, that these tax administrations then send the information about foreign taxpayers that they have received to the common transmission system of the OECD. And this then gets transported, so to say, or transferred to the tax administration that is responsible for this individual. So if you are an individual that is trading on a foreign exchange, it doesn't matter, your local tax administration will still know. And this is the ultimate reasoning also behind the crypto asset reporting framework, is actually to enable tax administrations to finally figure out which individuals are actually holding crypto. So to give you a rough idea, in Austria in 2022, 2,000 people declared any gains on crypto assets. 2,000 people. I think that Bitpanda has around 400,000 Austrian users for 2022. So it was a year of losses, yes, but it's a very low number. So tax honesty, tax transparency is around maximum of 5 to 10%. So there will be a lot of individuals now that are practically non-compliant. And I think the biggest reasoning behind the crypto asset reporting framework is to establish a basis for risk assessment. So basically identifying the big fish and really see which cases they would actually need to be worked on. So where are we right now in the negotiations of the crypto asset reporting framework? To give you some background, I co-chair the business advisory group at the OECD. So working closely with Working Party 10, the state delegations that are currently negotiating the crypto asset reporting framework, and the FAQs that are attached and used for implementation. And basically, there was a big discussion surrounding decentralized finance. So the question was really, is DeFi in scope, yes or no? And so basically then the OECD proposed, issued a first draft of the FAQs, which said, to the question, does the term reportable crypto asset service provider exclude decentralized exchanges and decentralized platforms? And the answer was no, . So what we have done recently is really have, again, discussions, okay, is DeFi in scope, yes or no? What we ultimately now are, it's still not clear where we are at the moment. The discussions are really towards okay, we want to align the standard with the FATF regulation and basically bring in a cozy assessment, which means that does an entity actually have control, sufficient influence over a trading platform that is available? But the DeFi platform is, the DeFi discussion is something that we can discuss for 3 or 4 hours. If anyone is interested in that, please approach me after the panel. We will go to more interesting stuff right now, namely the practical implementation. So you have all now a good starting point for CARF and where we stand. So basically, I hand over to Colby to discuss where we stand with jurisdictions and their actions.
Yeah, thanks, Max. And then this is very exciting because, as Max was describing, there's obviously a use case for the CARF, right? Currently, tax administrations it's very difficult to understand if I'm a taxpayer, I live in France, because that's where I am at with OECD, and I start trading on a crypto exchange that's not located in France. It can be very difficult for the tax administration in my jurisdiction to understand what my activities are. Now, the idea is that the CARF will provide the tax administration where I live with the relevant information to make sure that I'm actually fulfilling my tax reporting obligations. Now, given that there is that kind of information is currently not out there, one of the most interesting things about the work on the CARF is that governments really want to move fast in this space. Like, this is an area where I've worked in the OECD for a number of years now, and I've seen different kinds of projects where some kinds of projects it may take months and months of discussions just to get on a very sort of general baseline of what we're going to be doing. But on CARF, countries come together and they want to find solutions and they want to work together to make sure that this actually works soon.
Because they want money, right?
Well, they want to make sure that their taxpayers are fulfilling their obligations, right? And I think that there's absolutely a legitimate need to make sure that that the industry as well is providing the correct information reporting, and that there's a standardization of that information reporting. Because on the other side, I think that there's also a concern from governments that we want a standard, one single standard, because we do not want industry to have to comply with 50 different rules in 50 different countries with respect to this, because that's obviously a very a negative outcome. Is if we all know that this is obviously a very cross-border kind of industry, and if there's different rules with respect to reporting in every jurisdiction where a service provider is active, that's obviously not an ideal outcome. So those are really the two key drivers behind this work, right? Standardization and making sure that the information is going to come in as needed. Now, that being said, it's an exciting moment because we are working at the OECD. So basically, at the OECD, when we design these frameworks, we work with the OECD membership, which is 38 member countries of the OECD, to design the standard and publish it. That was done over the last several years, and the CARF was published in 2023. Now, one of the other things that we have as an advantage of the OECD is we have the Global Forum for the exchange of information for tax purposes. It's a big name, but that's where I work currently. And what we do there is we have a much larger membership than just the OECD. We have like 170 countries that are members of the Global Forum, and we work within this 170 member group to make sure that these standards, once they've been designed, are actually effectively implemented and adopted by all the members around the world. So with that, I think we had two slides. If we could just pop them up, that might be a good time to use them.
Romain, please.
Yeah, so this first one, it might be a bit small for folks to see. But last week we had an announcement that 63 jurisdictions came out and said that making a formal political commitment to put the CARF in place in time for first exchanges in either 2027 or 2028. So you'll see up there, there are a number of countries. Now, obviously, this is all public, so I can send around the link later if folks are interested in actually having the list. But we have up there, I can say just in general, right? All the EU member states are up there, but we also have, the United States is up there. We have other major jurisdictions for crypto. The UK, Singapore, UAE. They're all up there committed to doing this and making sure that it works either by 2027 or 2028. Now, one of the things that means is when we say 2027 or 2028, those are the years for first exchanges. But what that means in practice is from the industry standpoint, the actual work has to basically start now because that information that needs to be reported is the preceding tax year, right? So if it gets reported in 2027, that's information that is of the entire year 2026. And so that means that the service provider would need to actually have a system in place by the beginning of the year 2026 to collect the information for the full year and then report it to the tax authority.
And maybe just looking at the list, I was flagging this to Colby because what I thought very, very interesting because they joined last week is BVI, Dubai is in, so UAE. We have the Cayman Islands, we have Bahamas, we have the Bermudas. So it's very, very interesting to see that we have Barbados. There's more and more of these original tax havens joining. And so basically, someone reached out to me and asked, okay, why are these jurisdictions that don't really have any taxes on crypto joining this framework? And the question, like, and I think the answer is really because just to like there's a lot of regulatory pressure on them, like to avoid any grey listing, blacklisting, etc. And at the same time, it's also for the automatic exchange of information. So if you as an exchange that is operating in Dubai, even though like people that live in Dubai might not pay taxes, there might be foreign taxpayers that then get reported to their local tax administrations, right?
Yeah, I mean, I think there's also there's another story to be told here as well, which is that we have been working on the Common Reporting Standard, which is the automatic exchange of information for traditional financial accounts. And we've been working on that for over 10 years. And so, the countries that are on this list are countries that are all exchanging under the CRS. And we've worked with them, and they have already, implemented that, and I think they understand the benefits of participating in these types of information exchanges. So I think there's that side of it, but also I think there's the fact that many of these countries, even if you don't have taxes on crypto in your jurisdiction, you may have a significant industry presence in your jurisdiction. And one of the things that's really important that many countries I think see is just that having the right regulatory regimes in place is really, really key. And one of the things that the CARF provides is it's going to provide a lot of detailed information to the government with respect to the activities of the entities that are in their jurisdiction. And in some countries right now, maybe are only in the process, the first stages of putting those systems in place. But it's really, I think, important for them to sort of get that information eventually.
Thank you, Colby. And this brings us to the practical implementation. I mean, we heard that from 1st of January, players need to have a very comprehensive monitoring scheme in place where they collect transaction data, do self-certification. So how are compliance-first exchanges like Bitvavo dealing with this issue, Dorina?
Yeah, thanks, Max. Well, what I can say on behalf of crypto asset service providers, we are already quite overwhelmed with the regulation coming at the industry. We do realize the necessity of it, and the information exchange is no different from that. If we want to be a mature and recognized industry adopted by institutions as well, then without tax transparency, it's just not going to work. So we absolutely recognize the necessity of it, and I would say that we're already practicing and getting used to it. For example, a travel rule is a very great source of information or start of information gathering already, preparing for the information exchange and the reporting requirements. What is going to be particularly challenging for service providers, especially those such as exchanges like Bitvavo, we are not subject to the CRS before. The regulatory space is new for us. We're going to be newly regulated, so we cannot leverage already existing infrastructure and implementations. That's going to be particularly challenging. The other aspect of that is to receive the information actually from users. We have to do the same due diligence on both the new and the existing user base. And we already know, based on experience, how low the response rate can be when you're requesting additional personal information, additional identification from customers. Also, consequences are quite severe if we don't manage to do it. After 2 notifications, after 60 days, we need to block the transacting ability of these customers as well, which is quite a severe impact on them too. So I guess we have to start with proper awareness, both from the side of the crypto asset providers, but also I would say the tax authorities, to start already spreading the message. Why is it necessary? What's going to come? What can you expect, both as a crypto asset provider and as a customer?
And so maybe tying together with this, it's a quite comprehensive requirement, right? And what I've seen, also in our work from the Taxbit side, working with tax administrations, is tax administrations will now receive a lot of information, like Colby said. But what are they ultimately going to do with it? So basically, we have already certain jurisdictions in Europe that have implemented tax information reporting requirements for their service providers. Austria has a capital gains withholding regime where they will receive information from about Austrian taxpayers. Spain has implemented Modelo 172 and 173 for local taxpayers. Then Italy has implemented a tax reporting regime. And all of these tax administrations, at the end of the day, are sitting on a bunch of CSVs and Excel sheets that they have no clue how to evaluate and process the data, right? So I know that under CRS there was a lawsuit actually by a British law firm that then sued the government, namely HMRC, for the non-use of this data. So basically they said, you are collecting all this PII information and then make no sense of it, so it's just lying around. That's basically a misuse of personal information. So where do we stand with this? Are jurisdictions already thinking about the practical execution of data processing, Colby?
Yeah, thanks, Max. I mean, it's super important, right? So we can't obviously, like when we're designing the CARF, and when I talk about we designing the CARF, it's obviously OECD members, right? So it's governments themselves, the tax administrations in the room who are saying, this is the information that we need in order to assess the risk or the compliance of an individual with their tax obligations in their jurisdiction of residence, right? So the reporting requirements of the CARF and its scope in general has always been tailored to what a tax administration needs in order to make that assessment, which is something that is a legitimate, I think, a legitimate outcome that we can all agree with. Now, of course, there's that second question, which you're talking about is, so they have the right to receive the information, but then they need to use it, right? Now, that's something that we obviously are working on in terms of the implementation stage, right? So that's going to be a crucial thing. Now, we know that from the CRS standpoint, there's a lot of tax administrations, and like I said, the list that I was just showing you, the jurisdictions on that list are already the ones that are using CRS, right? So there's experience in that field in terms of how they use the information or what they need to do with it. And I think that's something that they're going to need to understand and implement in the CARF context, absolutely. On that, I would just like to make a plug, which is maybe if we could just use the second slide that I had given previously. But this is one of the tools that we work, yeah, perfect. So one of the other things that we're doing right now is we're actually like trying to develop tools that are sort of concrete tools that both tax administrations, but also the private sector can use to make sure that this data is actually reported correctly, but also that it's used by the tax administrations. And here is, and this is sort of a document that we came out with last week, which takes the reader through what the expectations are in order to fulfill the requirements of the CARF, but also to do it effectively. And I think there's some important lessons in there for tax administrations, and it comes back to this sort of question of what do we do with the data and how do we use it. But yeah.
Yes, so this is data ingestion, data information exchange, right? Great step-by-step guide also for the service provider. Yeah, and the practical execution, that's where we as a solution provider come into play. No advertising. So Dorina, to your side, also on the OECD requirements now. These are all like I discussed like at the start that maybe DeFi is not in scope, right? Do you see that like these reporting requirements you were talking about, getting the self-certification from existing users is very difficult, right? They already get confronted with a lot of KYC requirements. It's like we hear from exchanges that it's very, very expensive to actually go through these self-certs. Can't we reuse already existing data that we collected through KYC under FATF regulation? The answer is of course no, because there's no tax identification number involved. So, do you see that there is a threat that people actually leave more into DeFi and say, okay, we're not going to use centralized exchanges that ask us for all of this information because we don't want to be confronted with that?
Yeah, I absolutely see that there's a risk. Customers are going to become at least suspicious once you request more information from them. And even though the adopting countries, it's a very high number, 63 countries, and a lot of crypto asset providers are located there, but there's absolutely a threat that customers would choose then platforms or other methods, for example, DeFi for now, where they don't need to oblige with these requirements and that there's no information exchange happening. But then, especially in Europe, with MiCA, we went into a tremendous effort to protect and safeguard customer assets, which is net positive for customers. But on the other side, this might be a measure which is driving customers away to less protected and less regulated jurisdictions, which is, of course, contradictory to their best interest. So yes, there is absolutely a threat, and even within CASPs that need to comply with this requirement, there's a risk that if you start asking for the information first, you scare the customer first, then they might move on to the next one. So you also want to be very carefully calibrating when you want to be starting to collect the information, of course, as soon as possible, so you can be ready by the absolute deadline. You always need to take the customer's point of view into account. Now, I think this is also going to be strengthening on the trend of market consolidation and really the compliance first and the strongest players to remain in the industry, because this is also imposing additional costs on the crypto asset providers. So hopefully really those that already can bear the cost of compliance that are upcoming will also be able to bear the cost associated with the information exchange requirements. So hopefully customers really do have more solid and safe choices.
I might just come in, just 2 points to respond to that as well. Is like, one thing is I would say is just to make clear, so in terms of what it takes to identify a customer under the CARF, we're looking at customer identification rules that are in line with the FATF standards, right? So that's the baseline, right? So you're already doing that if you're already doing that for AML purposes, that's the information that you use to identify your customers. In addition, there are additional elements that will have to be fulfilled or obtained by the service provider with respect to its customers. So that goes back to address, date of birth, your TIN, those kinds of things. So just in terms of like indicating, it's not like a full-fledged new version of due diligence where we're talking about the FATF, AML, KYC standards, plus additional elements. So obviously, that's something to consider. But the other thing I wanted to say is this sort of idea of like, I guess what is it called, like the bubble analogy, where it's like you push a little bit on the bubble here, but then it expands over there because everybody just goes to the other jurisdiction where there's no regulation. So if we think back to that chart that I had showed you earlier, there's also at the bottom of that list, there are a number of jurisdictions that we have identified from the perspective of the Global Forum, the OECD, that are relevant to the CARF, but haven't yet made a commitment to put the CARF into place. That's something that we will continue to look at, right? So as the market develops, as exchanges maybe move, or there's certain types of exchanges that maybe take up activities to try and avoid these requirements, that's something that governments want to keep an eye on and want to stay after. So it's also not, I wouldn't think of it as like everybody who's going to comply is then going to be unfairly treated, because what we really want to make sure is there's always a level playing field, and that wherever we're dealing with business in the world, it's going to be on the same basis. So.
And maybe to add my 2 cents to that, I think that we will see a very big difference between crypto natives and new people getting into crypto. Because we are also, like we're always talking about mass adoption and like more and more people getting into crypto. I think the people that are onboarding right now are way more used to traditional financial compliance procedures anyways, because they are saying it's a broader public, so to say. Crypto has always been known, and also degens have always been known to go to these jurisdictions that have no tax rates, right? Crypto has been historically been used to avoid taxes, and that's a fact. So I feel like these players, of course, they might move away, but then again, I think that CARF will be an instrument that helps us in mass adoption and getting crypto more exposure to the actual broader public, right? And this is the ultimate goal here, and I think, Dorina, you highlighted that very well. It will lead to consolidation in the market, 100%. I feel like that this will require from the service providers to also mature, as they have done also under the AML package. So this will be, it will be a process that is going hand in hand with all the other regulation that is coming up, and it's becoming just more and more professionalized, so to say, and it's going to be a difficult development for decentralized finance, because we were discussing this, that like also under the scope of the crypto asset reporting framework, maybe as like just some final food for thoughts. Under FATF regulation, you are required to comply with FATF regulation if you go through a registering process. So if you register, you fall under FATF regulation. However, under the crypto asset reporting framework of the OECD, there is no registration process, which means you are by default in. And by default, decentralized finance is in, because they like if as soon as a transaction is effectuated, you're in. That means the burden of proof for claiming that you are, or like for proving that you are not in scope of crypto asset reporting framework lies within the individuals that then are approached by the tax administrations. So that's going to be a very interesting development to look out for, and something that where we definitely need a bit more clarity on as well, how this will be treated. But yeah.
Yeah, and just to say, I mean, again, the guide that I was mentioning earlier, one of the things we talk about are the areas where for service providers, this will be a new challenge, right? So one of the things, like you're mentioning, Max, is the fact that we're not talking about reporting requirements that are based on registration. We're talking about your activities. But one of the things that will be really, I think, important for service providers to do is to understand where they need to report, like what are the nexus rules, and what they need to report, what's the scope of the reporting requirements, and how to get the information, like you said, Dorina.
Exactly. And at the same time, of course, we want to create a regulation that is friendly for new developments as well. Because if it's blocking new innovation from coming up, that's an issue as well, right? So especially in the area of decentralized finance, this is something that definitely needs to be kept in mind. And why we said, like, ultimately, this burden of proof needs to be in line also with the FATF requirements. So basically, that you provide that you don't hold control or sufficient influence over a trading venue. Anyways, we are out of time. Thank you so much for the great discussion. Is there any questions from the audience? Yes, please.
Thank you. We're talking a lot about crypto here, but if I'm not mistaken, ESMA still has to define which are a financial instrument, and if so, they fall under MiFID. And then all reporting is, and also tax-related items are covered, no?
That is, sorry, if I may, that really just refers to the applicability of MiCA or MiFID, right? Because MiCA basically is a regulation, MiFID is a directive, so MiFID has to be implemented by every single member state. And the problem is, within the European Union, we don't have a transnational harmonized assessment way for financial instruments. We don't have something like the US or Howey test, for example. So a security would be treated differently. That doesn't, that has nothing to do with the crypto asset reporting framework. The crypto asset reporting framework basically applies as soon as it's a DLT-based asset.
Okay, so it can fall under that framework and under the local tax authority framework.
Exactly. No, it doesn't matter if it's a security or a commodity, but please.
Yeah, exactly. I was just going to say, I mean, there's the DAC 8, like the CARF, has its own separate definition of crypto asset, which is a functional definition based on what the asset is, the technology is used, basically. Yeah. And
if we look at DAC 8, actually the term reportable crypto asset service provider goes beyond MiCA. So DAC 8 will cover more entities than MiCA. So not just because you don't have a MiCA license doesn't mean then that you're not reportable under DAC 8 or the crypto asset reporting framework. Because DAC 8 was actually the first legal instrument in the European Union to introduce the term staking in a legal way. So DAC 8 also covers all staking providers, right?
Okay, thank you.
And there is no clarity on what staking is, by the way. So we tried to clarify this many times, and we have issued a lot of guidance on that, but yeah.
Hello, my name is Jorge Gerizati. I'm from Venezuela. I'm president of Economic Inclusion Group. My question is for you, Max. You mentioned, I think this is the quote you made, that most self-hosted wallets are used for tax evasion purposes. You mentioned that it's like a fact. And at the same time, you mentioned that you want more DeFi investments, innovation, etc. My question for you is whether this fact is within your reports and whether this language you think will have some regulatory unintended consequences of, for example, de-risking people in the tech sector. Thank you.
I was not saying that. Maybe just to disagree quickly, I didn't say that most self-hosted wallets are used for tax evasion.
People who use self-hosted wallet. You said that.
No, I didn't say that. You didn't listen properly. So basically, what I said is that, generally speaking, like with crypto-native players, a lot of crypto asset like DeFi transactions were used to avoid taxes, and a lot of people that were natively in the crypto sector moved to jurisdictions with low or no tax rates. This is basically what I highlighted before, but no, there are no numbers on that, obviously.
Also, I just want to say Max's statements are not in any way associated with the OECD or the publications.
Right, right. Yeah, I mean, just very quick. My concern is whether this will have unintended consequences on financial inclusion. That's all. Thank you.
Intended consequence? I'm not sure if I get the question.
Okay, so when you have this kind of statements, and you said that you didn't make the statement, so if that's the case, then apologize. But what I heard is that you said that most people who use self-hosted wallets or this kind of decentralized financial instruments do it for tax evasion purposes. Again, if you didn't say that, that's okay. My question was, or my comment is that if you have this kind of language in reports or in regulation, what will happen is that financial institutions will over-comply with tech, and it will lead to excessive de-risking in the sector. The same way that, for example, happens with people that come from sanctions jurisdictions, in which they are treated with way higher compliance requirements. Again, this is kind of my concern about how to balance financial crime, tackling financial crime, which is important, but don't doing it without unintended consequences for sectors or people that are in areas that are higher risk than traditional areas.
I absolutely agree. I absolutely agree, and I don't think that such language should be used in any kind of report or in any kind of statement. That's why I said a lot of transactions in DeFi, or like a lot of degens that would avoid being captured by the self-certifications, because we were talking about self-certifications and who would be captured by that, or if there's a threat that these people would go into DeFi. And I said, like, if they would avoid being captured by the self-certification, they would do it anyways. Like, the self-certification would not change this, right? And then they would go into DeFi. I use self-hosted wallets myself. Like, I'm not doing this to avoid taxes, right? The question is then, if you want to avoid taxes, that's the way you do it. Because there will be no way to do it like with a CFI entity. That was what we were talking about, right? And this is, but yes, I absolutely agree with you, and this is why this needs to be treated very carefully. And so basically, and this is why I also said, we were discussing this with Colby before, about the question of the inclusion of decentralized finance in the crypto asset reporting framework. Basically, what I did as co-chair of the business advisory group is opened the discussions up for decentralized finance. So basically, I was the one pulling in the DeFi players, the big ones, to actually take part in the negotiations and in the discussions, because the problem is that if they are not being like pulled in at the discussion level already, then we have an issue, right? Because you need to include those players that are actually confronted with that on a day-to-day basis. Any further questions? Please.
I'm sorry. Okay. I'm just wondering, I mean, this may be slightly at tangent. You know, now we have CARF and all this wonderful stuff. But across Europe, we have a really fragmented fiscal landscape where, like, I come from an EU country where we essentially have no tax on crypto, so it's great for us. But then, you know, our neighbor to the north has this crazy capital gains tax. So I don't even know how much it is. It's like 42% or something like that. Are there any initiatives aimed at harmonizing the tax landscape? Because every time we try and harmonize, we just end up fragmenting and competing with each other.
Yeah, so just to clarify, so I mean, what we're talking about under the CARF is information reporting, and this goes back to what, Max, you were saying at the introduction, right? So there's like two conversations we could have about tax. One is the issue you're raising, which is like substantive tax, like what should the tax rate be or what should be taxed in a country. That is not what we're talking about here. All we're talking about is the information for a tax administration to understand whether or not someone has complied with their tax reporting obligations in their jurisdiction. So of course, there's many jurisdictions that are already signed up to participate in the CARF that maybe either tax at very low rates or maybe have 0% tax on crypto, but nevertheless want to participate in these exchanges because they understand that there's a benefit of having that information and making sure they understand, what their taxpayers' activities are. But there's not, at the OECD, we're not pushing any sort of initiative towards harmonizing tax rates or taxation approaches with respect to crypto assets. That's very much for countries to decide on their own what they want to do with that respect. It's literally just the information reporting and making sure that that's harmonized because that's something the industry needs to have on a sort of consistent basis globally.
Understood. Thanks.
And even like when we talk about the European Union, maybe just as a final answer to that, in the European Union, a tax is still something that is seen as a core principle of state sovereignty. So even the legislation process of tax law or any tax-related regime like the AC8 is different than, for example, for the AML package. Because there's the principle of uniformity. So there needs to be a uniform consensus for any tax-related regime to be actually adopted in the European Union. And I can promise you that we will never have a single tax regime within the European Union. But yes, after all, I mean, like if we wanted to avoid a fragmented landscape, this would be favorable if there at least would be some kind of harmonization. Because with crypto, de facto taxation in individual member states in the European Union is all over the place. So in some it's capital gains, in some it's income tax, in some crypto is taxable, in others it's not. So in some you have a holding period, in some countries you have a withholding tax regime for service providers. So you see that there is a lot of fragmentation on very substantive tax issues. So it would be nice to see, but no, it's not going to happen anytime soon. Any more questions? Then thank you. Yes, please.
Just a very short one. So I think we see a lot of initiatives that are going in the digitalization, like EID or EDAS regulation. Wouldn't it be an approach that we actually simplify the approach a little bit and get this centralized, harmonized, that we can have the tax number done by central institutions instead of decentralized by each CASP? I know it's a big thing, and I know it would not have been possible to include that in the OECD framework, but like just from my point of view, if we would report, for example, name, surname, and birth date, we would cover 95% already, and we would avoid a lot of these problems to actually match and have data quality issues for tax numbers at each service provider, because at the end, and we need to just have clarity about that. I do understand the regulation and the reason for that, but again, we're pushing costs on the industry that could potentially be also centralized in having a translation between those are the people, that is then the tax number connected. I don't know if that makes any sense, and I know it's outside of the scope for now, but I would like to push that in a harmonization framework, in a later on digitalization framework, because otherwise we'll need to get 500 more numbers. We see with Mika the Concord, with plenty of those examples, and it's never harmonized.
So maybe just quick answer to that. The European Union has been trying to implement European TIN. It's not working. So there is still no standard on this, but yeah. It's something we look forward to get more guidance on 100%. So, Tommaso, I think, we have gone way beyond time, but thank you very much for the questions and thank you for the panelists. Thank you.